Good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Welcome to tonight's lecture. If you've not joined us before, my name is Dr. Sam Penny, and I'm a conservationist working at Bristol Zoological Society. So tonight we are joined by Dr. Prishani Vengetas, who is a veterinarian and wildlife recovery project coordinator for WWF-Australia. So Prishani will be discussing tonight her work with Regenerate Australia, a really exciting initiative to rehabilitate wildlife, restore habitats, and future-proof Australia against climate disasters. So it's something that's particularly pertinent at the moment if you're joining us from the UK, which a lot of people are, given the widespread heat records that have been broken in the last week and the fires we've experienced ourselves across the UK in the last couple of weeks. So this talk is, of course, being streamed live on Zoom, also on the Bristol Zoo Gardens Facebook page. And if you miss it, or there's people who you think would be interested in this, it will also be recorded and uploaded to our Bristol Zoo YouTube channel after the event. So if you can keep your microphones on mute throughout the talk, there should then be plenty of time at the end to discuss things with Prishani. And so Prishani, I can see you there. So thanks for joining us tonight. I'll now hand things over to you and you can begin sharing your screen. So let me just unshare my own screen. One moment. Hang on, bear with me. Technical issues. Hang on. Okay, perfect. So I was trying not to cancel my live stream at the same time. Brilliant.
Okay, let me give
so yeah,
we'll see how we go.
Perfect. So I can see your Annie the koala.
Oh, let's just
for the moment
right to the beginning. Okay,
perfect.
Right,
Brilliant. I'll leave you to it then, but yeah, thanks again for joining us.
all right, well, thanks so much, Sam. Let me just clear up my desktop and now we can start. Okay. All right, well, thanks so much for having me. Thanks everybody for joining, and a special thank you to Bristol Zoo for inviting me to share my stories from the field. Particularly, as you said, at a time when the UK is also feeling the devastating effects of climate change with rising temperatures, heat waves, fires. So this talk is hopefully quite topical, and maybe it might spark some ideas for the way that we can preserve and protect the UK's beautiful wildlife. So I know it's been a bit of a rough summer while I've been here in Britain so far. So I promise that we're going to have a great time together in the next hour or less. And there's going to be some sad stories, but there's also going to be a lot of happy ones. And of course, a lot of cute pictures of koalas, I promise. So today is also going to be maybe a little bit different. We're going to start with a story from the field during the Australian 2019-2020 bushfires. And then we'll take a little bit of a journey together through our learnings, which paved the way towards regenerating Australia. And before I get going, I'd like to just introduce myself a little bit. I'm a WWF-Australia veterinarian, and I work as an in-field vet, treating individual animals when possible, and also as a conservation vet focused on writing and reviewing conservation wildlife programs to ensure long-term sustainable change at the population level. And before this job, I've been a wildlife vet, an emergency vet, and also a general practitioner for some time. And about 10 years ago, I completed an externship at Bristol Zoo, and I sat in probably the very seats that you would have been sitting in today had we not been having this meeting over Zoom. And I remember with perfect clarity that I listened to a talk about the conservation of the crown sivaka in Madagascar. and it changed my world, and it set me on the path that I have come to today. And that journey has led me to working at the centre of the Australian bushfires. Australia, as you may know, has very particularly dry seasons in summer, where bushfires are somewhat a normal part of life. Our plants are sometimes require the fires to then germinate. Our wildlife are somewhat resilient and resistant to the fires. However, during December and January of 2019-2020, over 15,000 bushfires swept across our east coast, and the land was drier than it had been. The temperatures were hotter, and never before had we seen such a dramatic, tangible climate change event in our country. We lost over 3 billion animals, and that is only vertebrates. 3 billion. I mean, take a moment to process that number. And it doesn't include the potential trillion invertebrates that we also lost. And what's sad is that Australia continues to have one of the worst extinction records of any continent. It's obviously not something we're proud of, but it is a call to action. So let me take you back to search and rescue. I was working during the bushfires on the ground doing search and rescue, and we were unprepared and our efforts were largely unstructured for the magnitude of what we were faced with. We had processes in place, but as I said, the sheer volume made it difficult and a little bit scary. And like myself, many vets were volunteering their time to assist, and many others were seeing an influx of wildlife coming through their general practice clinics. And it is important to note that vets receive minimal training at university to treat native wildlife in Australia. And they also don't receive any government funding to take care of wildlife in the majority of hospitals. Now, we're working to change that, but at the time of the bushfires, this is what was in play. And still, there was such an outpouring of compassion and willingness to assist. So myself and my colleagues were setting up triage tents in the bush out of nothing. We were borrowing drones, like you can see here, to search for koalas, and they have heat-seeking abilities. And so sometimes koalas are very camouflaged by the Australian bush. It's hard to tell where they are, even if you're staring right at one. And so the heat, the thermal imaging drones are very useful. And this was really us, sitting there with maps, like static paper maps, and working out the night before or the day of where there were, where the bush had been burnt through, where we thought it was safe to access the grounds. And also we were talking to local landowners, people in the community, where they had seen koalas or kangaroos or native wildlife that were coming through that area, and that required veterinary care. And we did see quite a lot of wildlife, but for the most part, the fires burnt too fast, and most of our wildlife were unable to escape the blaze. And I remember sitting at dawn and at dusk, particularly, we'd go out into the bush because that's when our wildlife are most active. And we'd sit there and listen to hear where we could find the wildlife to take them into care if they needed it. And there's nothing so sad as hearing an empty forest. But the Australian bush is a very resilient thing, and you can see in this picture here that there's some regrowth on the trees, even though the trunk is still quite charred. And this is only just a couple months after the bushfires. So these kind of images and walking through this landscape, it also gave me hope in the months that followed the fires. Now, many organizations also responded to the bushfires, and they delivered rapid funds and resources where it was needed. And WWF-Australia also responded in this way. they developed the Australian Wildlife Nature Recovery Fund, and this was designed to deliver these funds that the public so generously gave in a way to try to help, especially even not just within the country, but overseas as well. Everybody just wanted to do something to help. And so these funds were directed under 4 main pillars, but the pillar that I was most closely working with was wildlife response. And what it allowed us to do are just a little snapshot here of supplementary feeding. So sometimes the wildlife, did survive and they were able to move on, but their habitat had been burnt through. And so they still needed food to survive on until that regrowth occurred. And we were getting in helicopters and dropping food down to them, carrots to patermelons, wallabies, whatever we could find, whatever we could give them to buy them a little bit of time until the natural ecosystem started to regenerate. And across from that, you'll see a little image of a dog, and that dog, I think her name is Taz, and she's a koala detection dog. It's a pretty cool concept, I think. These dogs are trained to sniff out koalas, and particularly the koala scat or their poo that's fresh on the ground. And so, like I said, because koalas are hard to find, these dogs would go out, sniff where the koalas were most frequently, and then we'd look up into the trees or send our drones up, send the koala climbers up to go in and grab these koalas and then treat them for their burns or whatever other injuries they have. We also generated an impact report, and what that did is, yes, it gave us those numbers of the 3 billion and more, but it also highlighted where priority species were affected by the bushfires, and it helped us really sort of conceptualize the magnitude of what we were seeing. And this map of Australia is just kind of an indication of something that we've been working on quite closely, to see where there are wildlife hospitals that could, in times of emergency, then provide that emergency care to wildlife. And it also helped to highlight where there were gaps in wildlife care. And so then WWF-Australia could donate resources or support projects and work together with the community to build hospitals or to upskill the hospitals that they already have. And these are some of the hospitals and images of the hospitals that we were helping to set up and support for the care of bushfire affected animals. And here is actually the picture of the kangaroo. I hope nobody's squeamish. It's a picture of the kangaroo's paws and pads. This was actually from a triage clinic that I was working at. And that was, I think, about 3 months after the fire had come through that area. And so the ground is still quite hot, and these animals, they have to maintain this constant contact. And it was a bit sad, to see that this kangaroo had been suffering for so long with these burns. And it was also strangely really rewarding, because the effects of the bushfire are so long lasting, and it was nice to be able to provide some support, take care of the wounds, wrap them up, reduce the pain and suffering that this animal had, and also watch it go through to its day of re-release, which, as you can imagine, is a really incredible moment. And so one of the happy stories is for a little koala named Annie. And I'll just share her journey with you here. Let me see if this works.
I actually saw Annie at Melbourne Zoo when she was receiving specialist critical care treatment, and that was back in February now. I did say she had quite severe burns to her pads of her feet, and she also had an infection in one of her nails.
I still don't know if that nail's going to come off or not.
So 4 months later, she's actually here and I've seen her. She's climbing the trees and she's looking fantastic. She did lose the nail, but it's great to hear that she's actually growing a new nail. She's feeding well, she's healthy, she has all those signs of being a very healthy animal. So she'll be moving in a few weeks to the larger enclosure, which is semi-wild. It gives her a feel for being back in the larger trees, getting that fitness again. And then when an appropriate place is identified for her, she will be released back into the wild. Obviously, that's the ultimate aim, is to get all wildlife back into the wild. The 13 koalas here are lucky ones. You know, it's very sad that many koalas didn't survive. The bushfires were just so ferocious that a lot of animals didn't get to the rescue stage. Obviously, protecting our natural habitat is vital, supporting the important work that's being done, and that we future-proof so that we're prepared for any future emergencies. Thank you so much for the generous donations by all of our supporters from around the world. It's really been overwhelming, and you can see the important work that's been supported as a result of the funding that we've received. So thank you very much.
Okay, so things worked out pretty well for Annie, and we're so grateful for those small wins. But wildlife were facing an even greater challenge, and more than ever before. And so it was clear that we couldn't just do wildlife response, you know, in the moment when it happens. These are extreme environmental events that are symptoms of broader conservation issues that undermine the health and the resilience of wildlife, humans, and the environment. And so Regenerate Australia is an idea for a new way forward. It's a $300 million program to help restore wildlife and habitats, rejuvenate communities impacted by the bushfires, and boost sustainable agriculture and future-proof Australia. It's an opportunity to help people, wildlife, and the environment to thrive. And I put this slide in as a last minute because I feel like I'm still learning and still growing in this role, and there's always more to learn in life. And I've picked up, you know, little bits of such valuable stories and information along the way. And this picture in the center is when I was planting a tree with some colleagues. And I remember my colleague said to me, you know, it's not just a tree. In 100 years, this tree will still be here. And when you think about it, like even just looking at that tree, I looked up and I saw a tree we had planted, you know, earlier, like another year earlier, and there was a koala mum in there with her baby. And to see such a tangible, you know, response to what we had done, plant a tree, and there's a koala that's there ready to eat that tree and sustain life. But it's also not just that clear link. You know, some people don't like bats, but I think they're pretty cute. I mean, that one in the corner is super cute. But all bats, and you know, that bat, that little girl in particular, is going to one day grow up and pollinate koala food trees. And that's great, not just for koalas, it's great for us. She'll also pollinate agricultural crops and sustain the environment that koalas and that we live in. So as I continue down this journey, I just get more and more of these clarifying moments that, you know, we're all connected. And when we start to look at life in that way, I think it will change how happy we are as a community, in the world, as individuals. And I think it just makes us feel better. It already has made a huge difference for me. And so because of this interconnectedness, Regenerate Australia operates through 5 different programs at the moment. And Koalas Forever is the first one, and that's the one that I work most closely with. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about this program later. First, I just want to really let you in on why we chose to focus on the koala. Is it because they're really cute? Because they are. But also, we don't just want them to be this cute teddy bear by 2050. We chose them as a flagship species because their numbers have been drastically declining across the eastern seaboard, and they've lost significant portions of critical habitat to logging and bushfires. And in addition to this, they continue to suffer from the effects of climate change, disease, dog attacks, and car collisions, to just name a few. But it's not just about koalas either. Koalas are surrogates for a large range of animals in the bush, such as greater gliders, which is the fluffy possum-looking thing on the end here, platypus, quolls, and cockatoos. So not only will preserving koalas help other animals, but it will also help Australian communities, and protecting their habitat will lead to improved ecosystem services such as water quality, carbon sequestration, and pollination, as I mentioned before. So Koalas Forever is a program that is aimed at turning that tragedy of the bushfires around and preparing koalas for a future affected by climate change using a multi-pronged approach. We're focusing on important strongholds for koalas. They're not all across Australia, as I think some people think they are. There are very particular areas that they live in, and there's some that contain very distinct metapopulations and climate refugia. So this pillar includes cultural burning, drone seeding trials to replant and restore koala habitat, large-scale climate-ready planting, and the development of conservation financing mechanisms such as carbon offsets and incentive payments to restore and create private protected areas. And you can see here, one of the key components is critical care, which is to establish and capacitate wildlife hospitals across Eastern Australia, particularly to increase the survival rates of sick and injured koalas and other wildlife. And that's very much my job here at WWF-Australia. So hospital projects is one aspect, and upskilling them, making them ready to be able to act in times of emergency and also on a day-to-day basis. And one of the first projects was for what looks like a semi-trailer at the top there is actually a mobile hospital in Byron Bay, which carries state-of-the-art equipment, facilities, and really, really amazing vets who are, because it's on wheels, are able to go out and act a little bit faster than we would have in the past. And like I said before, you know, there's that lag time. And so now we're doing what we can to reduce the lag time and get them into care and into great high quality facility care as quickly as we can. So that's one project that I'm working on that I'm really, really happy to be a part of. Another part of keeping koalas going is to address disease. Chlamydia is the most common and well-known disease of wild koalas. It's estimated to be found in up to 48% of the population, and in some parts of Australia, infection rates are as high as 90%. It's one of the key threatening processes contributing to koalas being listed as endangered, and it primarily causes conjunctivitis, as you can see here, and also kidney disease, and can lead to kidney failure, which of course can be fatal. The disease itself is thought to be exacerbated by stress that koalas can feel from anything, but particularly from ongoing deforestation, drought, and the recent bushfires. This is clearly a significant threat to koalas amongst, you know, many other, but it's a great opportunity to support vaccination research and improve koala recovery efforts by controlling chlamydia. There is actually a very new project that we're just about to launch, which is not just to vaccinate, you know, as many koalas that come into care or that require it as possible, but also to look at the number of vaccination levels that is required to then confer protection onto the rest of that closed population. And that's pretty revolutionary work. And I'm very excited when I go back home to be climbing some trees with koalas and vaccinating them and just providing a better, healthier landscape for them as well. And as I said, emergency response was how we initially started, and there's some ongoing work to support just improved emergency response for the next event, which we know is coming. Then it's more than just hospitals. It's increasing the number of prepared veterinary volunteers through appropriate training and wildlife care, providing vets with additional knowledge to safely enter those fire grounds in emergency situations when required to by state and national approved agencies to do so, and increasing the number of vets licensed to safely capture and treat wildlife. In Australia, as you can imagine, it's not easy to capture a kangaroo, for example, or even a koala from the trees. They all require very specific capture management and handling. And then the last component is to provide vets and hospitals and rehabilitators, which we can't forget about. The carers do such an incredible job and they volunteer their time every day. And so it's to provide them with resources like mobile triage units, this mobile van as well, which has some pretty cute graphics on it as they drive around in Victoria. It's to provide them with darting equipment and anything really necessary to provide wildlife with timely treatment. And what all of this does together is to create what I like to call wildlife care corridors. We have green corridors, but I think in this changing landscape of where there's increased spillover risk, the increased interface of wildlife to humans, and a lot of their problems are as a result of human interaction, and that is rising with the rising population of humans across the world. So I think it is important to have these wildlife care corridors so that it supplies important linkages in the creation of wildlife care across Australia, and will assist then to mobilize with a nationwide emergency response team that will integrate with existing government pathways. And this means the provision of physical as well as intellectual infrastructure, which is an important response to rectify these key gaps in wildlife care to create sustainable conservation change. So we know climate change is here. Environmental extremes are on the rise. We saw it in the bushfires in Australia in 2020, and then again in Turkey, Greece, and Bolivia in 2021, and even more remarkably in England this very summer. But this isn't a story about defeat. It's about hope. Maybe we did need a spark or even a fire to get us moving in the right direction. But here we are, standing on the precipice of change. So Regenerate Australia is a snapshot of how we can regenerate Earth. This is a short clip. It's a teaser for a 17-minute WWF film, and it's a vision of what life could look like if we begin to live in harmony with nature and dare greatly in finding a new way forward. It is a future that I wish for Australia, as well as for England and every other country around the world. I hope that when you watch it, you will find inspiration, courage, and faith in this changing world.
We leave you with a look back at the highlights of a remarkable decade that has changed Australia forever.
The 2020s began in extraordinary fashion.
work more regionally.
More work, more opportunity.
Solar and batteries would be ideal.
And build a sustainable society.
Today marked the first time that Australia has run on 90% renewable energy for an entire month.
That makes me feel really, really happy.
The government today announced it will follow the lead of other countries and live stream key policy discussions.
I think it's good. We need transparency.
Australians are now seeking out Australian-made and owned products. The ripple effect is that we are now seeing healthy farmers.
There's nothing like endangered animals in a landscape that's coming back to life to give all Australians a real heartbeat.
We can deal better with the world when we're connected to nature.
It's been amazing to see the change that's happened from the closure of the power stations to the renewable energy zones. The young people are starting to stay and find work.
This family right now are earning cash because their electricity service provider are paying them to use the battery in this ute as storage for the grid.
In a decade full of transition and tragedy, many Australians are finding renewed purpose in the regeneration of our social and ecosystems. Australians are starting to feel more secure.
This is a landmark day for our country.
A day like this means that all of this work has actually meant something.
Respect is back and our pride is back. Respecting the environment. From that gives us the strength to look to a brighter future.
If not me, who? If not now, when do we do it? It's never too late to stand up and take action together.
Thanks everybody for listening. I'm going to stop sharing now, Sam.
No problem. Thanks. That was a fascinating and inspiring talk. So yeah, we've heard, I mean, particularly in the UK here, we heard so much about the 2019-2020 bushfires in particular. Obviously it made global news, but to see the sort of the personal side of that and the workings on the ground is yeah, really interesting and incredible to see that the work that you have been doing and will be doing over the next months, years, decades, I suppose. I mean, climate change isn't going anywhere anytime soon, unfortunately. So I'd like to open the floor to questions. So if anyone's got a question, you can raise your hand and unmute yourself, or you can type it in the chat. If you're watching us on Facebook, you can type in the live chat there too, and I'll try and pick that up as well. I think there's a slight lag on that, but pretty much running to the same time as well. So I'll just give people a moment because I'm sure there will be questions to come. But no,
while the questions are coming in, yeah. I think the one thing that I didn't really say is that it was, I mean, it was a really hard time, right? But the connection with community, with each other, like we were talking to each other like we hadn't before. We were coming up with solutions and problem solving on the field. It was a really, like I said, devastating time, but also really inspiring time to be a vet and to work with other colleagues.
Yeah, no, yeah, it must have been. Sorry, I was just reading the question that popped up at the same time there. So you might be able to see this too, but I'll read it out for the benefit of everybody here as well. So this is a question coming from Paige, and it says, when you treat koalas for chlamydia during rehabilitation, how effective is this? How long does it last? If money wasn't an issue, how would you tackle reducing chlamydia in koalas? Would yearly vaccinations after breeding season be an approach you could take?
Yeah, so chlamydia is a tricky one to treat. It can be quite effective. We definitely do have a facility where we have koalas that come through and are treated at Currumbin Wildlife Hospital, particularly. Those are our key partners there. And it can take about 12 weeks to get them through. Obviously, it depends on how severely they're affected. Some koalas with chlamydia, they don't show external signs, and so it it's not immediately apparent, and they can function, particularly in Victoria and the southern koalas, they manage quite well and it doesn't affect their fertility too much. Whereas others are, as you saw in the picture, are very affected. So it depends on how affected they are, but they can come into care for very significant lengths of time, particularly if they're closer to that, kidney disease and kidney failure stage. Yes, we are euthanizing some of them in the interest of their own health. Like, we don't want to create welfare situations that result in us pushing them to try to live longer. Always try and think, what's best for that individual animal. And then the vaccination process also takes a significant amount of time, because you have to vaccinate them and then wait the requisite time and then do a second vaccination, although they are trialing a single shot vaccine. And the vaccination has not been licensed as in that everybody can just vaccinate koalas now in any hospital. It's still going through trials. And so our key work is to just try to prove that which one is best, and then support that vaccination to be used more freely.
Thanks. Excellent answer. So hopefully that answers your question there too, Paige, but feel free to ask follow-up questions too. I mean, if there's anything else you want to push there. So Sue has just put a quick question there saying, thanks for the taster video. Is there a longer version available? And is there a link that can be shared? So I think we can paste the link to the Regenerate Australia webpage in the chat in a second.
Yeah, I think I sent you the original link. On the website has the teaser, and then it will also let you know. I think we're almost ready to share it globally now. It's been shared slowly through individual screenings and screenings with key organizations. And then once that is done, then it goes live to Australia and then to the global community. So Amazing. If you follow that website, that will tell you more updated information. It's not my department, unfortunately, but I think they've done such a great job. And I remember watching that video, and particularly, doing this work every day. Sometimes, it can get you a little bit down, a little bit sad. And I remember watching that video, and I felt this incredible hope for my country, that Australia, we could come out of the crazy political storm that we were in, and then also the environmental problems and climate change. And I think it's really important to do whatever we can to keep that hope alive.
Amazing. So I've just pasted a link there. You can double check for me, please, Prishani, if that's the correct one. In the meantime, I'm going to read out another question because they're coming in fast now. So a question from Alex says, does this project also look at regenerating coral reefs as well, or does it just focus on land conservation?
No, so there is definitely an oceans marine aspect to regenerating Australia. Because as well, there have been studies to show what bushfires do to freshwater and to marine life as well. It's like I said, it's all interconnected, so they won't be left out. And also, as a result of climate change, most likely we've recently experienced very significant floods, and that has unfortunately covered seagrass with sediment, and we expect to see more strandings from dugongs and sea turtles. And so we're working really hard to try to restore those ecosystems, and also to support the wildlife that are going to be affected by that. There's a lot of work to do, but we're doing the best that we can.
Excellent. Yeah, so a really hugely encompassing set of very disparate, I guess, but related conservation initiatives there that it covers from.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just reading the questions as well to answer them. The inevitable fires, how are we going to protect the habitats? Yeah, there's, like I said, a lot of work being done to protect the habitats. Firstly, to find what are our key priority areas, because there's so much to protect. We're looking into fauna crossings where possible, and to create those green corridors, which is important in connectivity to allow animals the passage of movement. And I'm not sure if you had heard about the Wollombi pines, which they had spotted that this was a key area that was incredibly endangered, and so everybody sort of mobilized to go and protect this particular area. And I think that once we start to work out our priorities and what we can do with the funding that we have and whatever the government is on board with, then we'll be a little bit more prepared. And right now there are multiple initiatives going out to get those key people talking in a room together and to organize our emergency response management plans now across many, many organizations.
There's some fascinating videos of the Wollemi pines being protected. If you look it up on YouTube, of how they had, as you mentioned, sort of some unique habitat, and how they stopped huge fires just burning through them. But there's some great information out there. So another question from Penny. It says, I'm curious, what is the wild versus captive expected lifespan of koalas when chlamydia free? And by how much does the disease shorten their lifespans?
Like I said, it's tricky. There's not just one sort of koala species. There are many subspecies, and they handle it in different ways. For example, the northern Queensland sort of koalas are smaller built. They're not as resilient to chlamydia, and their lifespan, which can be around 13 to 15, sometimes a little bit more years, it can be drastically shortened because of chlamydia. I know that in a hospital that's in that location, about 60% of their koalas that come in at the moment are suffering some effects of chlamydia. Now they may come in for something else, like trauma, hit by a car, or something associated with that, but then they also have evidence of chlamydia, and there's tests that we can do to determine that. But a koala in Victoria, which is bigger, they're furrier, it's colder down there, and so they have different issues. So they may carry chlamydia, but they're not suffering from it, from conjunctivitis or kidney disease. They're still reproducing in large amounts, but their problem is that their lifespan is being shortened because of logging and habitat destruction. Planting trees is fantastic, and it's great that we can do that, but saving the habitat that they already have is also critical. And these koalas, because they're still, innately healthy, they need food. And if they're not getting that from that habitat, then their life will be shortened for a different reason, independent of chlamydia. I hope that kind of answers that question.
Thanks. I think it did. So what I will do is see a comment from Paige there too about how to get in touch. So I'm going to post my own email address in the chat. So if you have got any follow-up questions for Prishani, I can forward those on to her. If the other thing you can do is, if you want to subscribe to our Bristol Zoo Conservation Lecture series mailing list, is send me a message and I can get you added to that too. So I'll paste that in the chat now. My contact details as well.
I'll just paste in the film website.
Excellent.
And there's a little link
yes,
that says see the film, and you can just click on that and register that you'd like to see it if it's not freely available soon.
Cool, fantastic. No, that's brilliant. So as I said, this will also be up on our Bristol Zoo YouTube channel. So if I saw a few people came partway through. So if you do want to look back and watch the beginning of this, go to Bristol Zoo Gardens on YouTube. It won't be up yet. I've still got to share and upload that, but within the next week or so, that should be up and available to watch. So we've got, sorry, go on.
I'll just say, if you want to contact me, you have my email address as well, particularly from other vets, and I can see Penny's comment as a zoologist. We're very keen to learn more. There's always more to learn. I'm still, unfortunately, learning every day, but you kind of just roll with the punches as the landscape shifts and changes. So feel free to contact me if you also want to, follow the journey. It's completely unofficial, but you can follow me on Instagram, where it's kind of like behind the scenes of day-to-day life as well. So, and also what I find is that if there are some young people on here as well who will be watching this and want to be vets or are very interested in conservation, I do get a lot of people contacting me and asking me for just a bit of support. As I'm sure everybody here probably knows, it can be a bit of a tough world to get into as a career, and I'm so on board with helping other people, and particularly women in wildlife. It's really important that we support each other.
Fantastic. Okay, so thank you again for joining us. Hope to see you at the zoo soon, Prishani. And the next details on our, it won't be till September, our next talk, but they'll be circulated out soon. So we're going to take a break for summer over August, but there will be more talks advertised on our website, on our Facebook page to come. So I'm going to end the live stream now on Facebook. And again, yeah, any follow-up questions, feel free to ping them to me and I can pass them on to Prishani, or find her on social media as well. So let me end the stream. And as I said, it will be up on YouTube. Perfect. And some thanks coming in the chat there, Prishani, too, that hopefully you can see as well.
I can see it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody taking their time, at the end of probably a very busy day. And when, we're having great weather, somewhat. It's a bit cooler now and you can go out and go for walks. And so I really appreciate your time and your thoughts. And if you have any further ideas on even how we can improve, then I'm all ears. I'm really keen to connect. Thank you so much for having me, Sam, as well.
No problem. Thank you very much for joining us. As I said, it's been brilliant and really interesting to get a talk, as I said, from the veterinary side of conservation. We've had so many talks the last few months focusing on all kinds of taxonomic groups, but we've not had a veterinary slant, and it's such a key part of many conservation programs and initiatives that it's been really great to hear from you. So I will end the Zoom chat now, and hopefully see some of you again in a couple of months' time. Thanks and goodbye.
Thanks, bye.